Hello, and thank you for joining me today. We will be reviewing a PowerPoint presentation that reviews how to conduct the point in time count in San Luis Obispo County. So today we'll be covering the purpose of the PIT count. And when I say PIT count, PIT stands for point in time count. So we're going to be reviewing the purpose of this PIT count, why the PIT count matters, what the PIT count will tell us. We'll be reviewing what you will be doing on the day of the count, and then we'll finish up going over next steps and reminders. I'm going to start by reviewing the purpose of the point-in-time count. The Department of Housing and Urban Development requires this point-in-time count to be completed of every homeless person in the United States during the last 10 days of January. These unsheltered counts are currently required every other year, and the counts are happening all over the country. They must be organized. The PIT count is important for a number of reasons. It increases the community understanding of homelessness. It enables counties to retain and improve funding for homeless services by meeting federal data reporting requirements. This methodology that we will be reviewing today and that you will be participating in on the day of the count is a method that has been approved by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. In addition, the count generates valid and accurate data regarding individuals and families experiencing homelessness in the community. And then lastly, it links homeless data collection efforts to national and local strategic program and policy planning. So what we're doing here in the county is also connected to data that's being collected nationally. Here I want to review the overall components that are a part of the PIT count. So there's a few different things that will be going on to complete this process. You will be participating in the middle box, the general street count. But I wanted to go ahead and review everything so that you have a better understanding of what we are doing in San Luis Obispo County. On the night before the count, which is the evening of January 29th, we will be working with all of the shelters in the county to get a better understanding of how many homeless individuals are staying in those shelters. They'll report to us that number based off of the evening of the 29th. Next, we have the general street count. So that happens in the early morning hours of the 30th, and that is what you're participating in. In addition, later in the day, we do a youth count, and that happens in the afternoon hours. So those two, the general street count and the youth count, make up the bulk of our unsheltered data. And then the third and final box here is the survey. So that's conducted in the 2 to 3 weeks following the day of the count. And that is when we send out surveys into the field and we collect information of a representative sample of the homeless population, and we ask them questions to get a little bit more information about the experiences that they have faced in the county. So next I'm going to review the definition of unsheltered homelessness. So before I get into the actual definition, I just want to remind you that the PIT count is one of many different strategies that the federal department uses to understand homelessness and as a way to allocate funding for services. The definition that is used for the PIT count is somewhat limited. So like I said, just wanted to acknowledge that this process is just one piece of the puzzle, and by them asking us to focus on a specific population with specific needs, we're able to really focus on getting the job done to help ensure an understanding of the homeless population and also in order to receive funding for the homeless population. So the definition is, and I'm just going to read this straight from the slide here, it's the Hearth Act definition, Category 1, and it reads, individuals and families who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including individuals and families with a primary nighttime residence that is a public or private place not designated for or ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings. In the next slide, I'm going to go over a little bit further what this includes and doesn't include. So here's this next slide that I was referring to. So some of the shelter accommodations that are included in the homeless definition would be makeshift shelters, people living on the streets, people living in vehicles, people living in parks or abandoned buildings, people staying on buses, in bus or train stations, people living in airports, or people staying at camping grounds without paying for a permit. Some areas that are not included, and this is where I want to remind you of this somewhat limited definition so that you understand what you're looking for on the day of the counts. We will not be including people who are couch surfers, people who are living in double up situations. Double up would be where you have maybe a family of 8 or 9 people staying in a 1-bedroom house. So a house that's maybe meant for 2, 3 max, you have, up to double the amount of people that is meant to stay in that house. We're not including people in rehab or mental health facilities. We're not including most people staying in jails or prisons. And then we're also not including anybody awaiting eviction or foreclosure. So that's a little bit of a review of what to expect of what you're looking for on the day of the count. Here you see a couple pictures of some areas that would be included. This left picture would be an example of an encampment. So an encampment is an area that has at least 2 or more tents or makeshift shelters. And then on the right is an example of a bus station where you might find somebody sleeping and they would be defined as homeless. As I mentioned in the previous slide, individuals living in their cars are included in this definition. So this slide is meant to review how to tell if a car or a vehicle appears to be inhabited by a homeless individual. So you're going to look for signs of habitation in the car. So that would be fogged windows, maybe electrical connections coming out of the car, screen or window coverings. Oftentimes there'll be household items inside and outside of the vehicle, making it seem like more of a permanent living place. You might hear sounds of music or talking from the inside of the vehicle. And then sometimes there are some known safe parking locations or known vehicles by your homeless guide. So remember, we don't want you, and I'll review this a little bit more in the safety slides, but we don't want you to be going up to these cars or knocking on their windows to see or ask these individuals if they are homeless. Rather, we want this to be a visual count. So hopefully you can remember this slide and work with your homeless guide to determine whether a vehicle appears to be inhabited by homeless individuals or not. So some of the logistics of what to expect for this PIT count. Like I started to mention in the previous slide, the street count is a visual count of people residing on the street, in parks, in vehicles, in abandoned buildings, and in makeshift shelters. I want to emphasize the visual count piece. While you're out there in the field, we ask that you don't interrupt these individuals. They might be sleeping, they might be inside of a tent. We ask that you don't go up and talk to them. If they approach you and are interested in what you're doing, you're more than welcome to have a conversation. But first and foremost, we want to make sure that we're respecting these individuals' living accommodations and respecting and being respectful of their space. The street counts are planned while people are still in public shelters. That's why we head out there as early as possible. Like I mentioned before, this timing is important to avoid duplication. This earlier time is generally when individuals are still going to be in the shelters. So we can get those individuals from our shelter count, and then we have you guys out in teams to collect people who are living in unsheltered situations. If you have a map area that includes a shelter, we ask that you head to that area around the shelter first. A couple more logistics I want to review. Just a reminder that volunteers will not be paid for their time, nor will they be reimbursed for their mileage while out in the census tract areas. Homeless guides are paid $15 an hour, and that's for their expertise during the count as well as for their time spent in training. Just a reminder that all homeless guides must have a 2017 PIT count referral card and a training attendance card in order to receive payment on the day of the count. Another reminder that all payments will be made when teams return to the deployment center on the day of the count. So payment for homeless guides attending trainings, as well as their time spent out in the field, will be received after they return with materials at the end of the count. few more logistics to review. I wanted to go over the timeline of what to expect on the morning of the count. So you will arrive at the deployment center at 6 a.m. Both guides and volunteers will be coming at this time. There'll be some paperwork for you to fill out, a sign-in sheet and a hold harmless agreement. We'll also review some of the safety protocols and then go over some of the data collection forms. After that, our volunteer and guide teams are created. So that's where we match up a volunteer and a homeless guide, and we create the team that you'll be working with for the morning. Once that team is created, you will receive your street count packets. So those are your maps and data collection forms. You'll receive a clipboard and some pencils. You'll receive a copy of the training guidelines to review in case you needed to know any more information when you're out in the field. And then we'll give you a contact number in case you need to contact us back at the deployment center while you're in the field. And then some stickers that you can wear while you're out walking around. Once all that is completed, you'll have all your forms and information. There's a quick checkout process where we collect your contact information and write down which maps you're taking out, and then you'll head out into the field. When you finish your maps, we'll have you head back to the deployment center. You should be returning to the deployment center by 10 a.m. If you think you're going to be any later, we ask that you call us. And if you finish earlier in the morning, feel free to come back as soon as you're done. Once you return to the deployment center, we'll review the tally sheets and make sure everything went well while you're out in the field, and then we'll send you off on your way. Here's a couple pictures of examples of what it will look like at the deployment center. Usually there's some coffee or snacks in the morning provided, and then some tables set up with all of the materials, and we'll have all of our volunteers and guides congregate in the middle, and then from there, once we review the safety protocols, we'll create the teams and everybody will be on their way. I wanted to review quickly the team creation logistics. So like I said, the volunteers and guides arrived at the deployment center. Then there's the review, like I mentioned, of the safety tips and count protocol. And then these teams are created of 2 to 3 people. Generally, this is 1 to 2 volunteers and 1 guide. The reason why I'm taking time to review this is because we want to make sure that everybody knows what to expect on the morning of the count. It's important that we have enough volunteers to match with our guides, and that also we have enough vehicles. So even if you arrive with a friend or a colleague, it's possible that you will get split up and be on separate teams. It all just kind of depends on who shows up on the day of the count and what our numbers look like. Once your team is created, you're assigned a map location. So I want to remind you that the entire county has to be covered. So that means not everybody's going to get a map that will be in an area that is likely to have a lot of homeless individuals, but it's our responsibility to send out teams to every corner of the county. The deployment center captain will manage this assignment process. Just so you know, some maps will be pre-assigned, but most teams will be created and assigned to areas on the morning of the count. So the reason for mentioning this is just because the logistics of creating the teams in the morning can get a little bit tricky. So we just ask for your patience and patience with us during the map creation process. And in addition, we try as best we can to get guides and volunteers headed to locations that they are familiar with, but sometimes we're unable to accommodate everybody. So we ask that you come prepared to help out in any way possible and help us cover the entire county. So next I'm going to review the data collection forms. So the 2 important things that you're going to be going out in the field with are the maps and the tally sheets. So I have a few slides coming up that will show you what to expect. This is an example of what the tally sheet looks like. So in addition to your map, you will have this tally sheet. This is how you describe the individuals that you're seeing. In the coming slides, I'm going to go over and review some examples of what you might find. But for now, I just wanted you to see what this looks like. All these boxes on the top will be pre-filled out by us. That's for our coding purposes and to explain what this tally sheet goes with. But the boxes on the bottom, that's the area that you will fill out for individuals that you see. This is a sample of a map that you will receive on the morning of the count. So you'll see this is San Luis Obispo County, Census Tract 102.02. Again, this is a sample, so your map won't necessarily look like this, but you'll see that the census tract is outlined in this kind of purpley magenta color. So that is the area that you're going to need to count inside of. We don't want you counting anywhere outside of this area. We ask that you trust that other teams who are covering those areas are counting that area. We want you to go up and down every street on your census tract map. It's important that we cover the entire area. In addition, there will be times where you can't cover areas from your vehicle, so it'll be important that you work with your guide to determine when and where it's necessary to get out and walk around. This might be under bridges or in parks or maybe going down some ravines. Just depends on the geography of your map. It's very important that you pay attention to make sure the tally sheet that you are filling out is connected with this map. So if you have more than one map area, you'll have different tally sheets for each map. So make sure you're filling out individuals on the correct tally sheet that correlates to the correct map. In addition, I want to point out that there are two different colors within your map area. There's this purpley area and there's also the white area. These represent different jurisdictional areas. So white is unincorporated area, and there'll be a tally sheet for the white part of your map and a separate tally sheet for the purple. So depending on where you are in your census tract, when you find a homeless individual that you need to count on your tally sheet, you need to make sure that you put it on the right tally sheet based off of where you are. I'll review this again in one of the next slides, but just wanted to give you a heads up while you have the visual of the map to look at. Like I said, this isn't necessarily what your map will look like, but we will have the opportunity to review your map areas on the morning of the count in person before you head out into the field. All right, this slide is just meant to reiterate the importance of what I spoke of when we were looking at the maps regarding the jurisdictions. Depending on the map you receive, you might have your census tract be all in one color, in which case you won't have to worry about the different tally sheets. But if that's not the case, like in that last sample, if you see somebody in the purple area, you're going to use the tally sheet that has that census tract number on it, and then also in that correct jurisdiction area for the purple side. And then if you see somebody in the white side, white area of your map, that's unincorporated, and you're going to fill them out on a separate tally sheet. I hope this makes sense. Like I said, we'll review it again in person on the morning of the count. All right, so next few slides will be some samples of how to fill in your tally sheets. So on the bottom in red, this would be, you see one individual who looks to be about in their 30s on the street. So you'll go through and mark line number 1, fill in for male if the individual is a male. If the individual is a female, you can bubble F. T stands for transgender. U stands for unknown. So you would mark unknown if the individual is sleeping in a sleeping bag or has a hat on or a hood and you can't tell whether they're male or female. It's okay to put unknown. Then you select the age category that you are assuming they're in, and then you go over to the dwelling or vehicle type and you write where you saw them. Since this individual is on the street, you fill in the bubble for street. The next sample we have would be if you see a family. So this family is 2 adults and 1 child. So I marked here that line 1 would be male in the 25 to 54 category on the street. Second would be a female in the 25 to 54 category on the street. And then the third line is for the child, so under 18 female on the street. This, you'll see a column that says family. Only fill in those bubbles if you can tell that it's a family, and then you'll fill in the bubble for each line, and then we ask that you draw a circle around them. I don't imagine that you will find many families while out on the street. However, it's important to review this so that if you do, you can appropriately mark that they are a family. Next would be a sample of a vehicle. So I reviewed earlier some signs to look for vehicles who are inhabiting homeless individuals. Now I'm going to review what to do if you see one. So likely, if you see a vehicle, you won't necessarily know how many people are in there. So it's okay to just put one line and circle in a bubble for car. If you are able to see, if you're able to see two people and you can guess their gender and age, you can go ahead and fill in a line for each person and put car and fill in the bubble for car on each line. But this is an example of you being unable to tell how many people are inhabiting the vehicle, but you can tell that somebody's living in there and that you are seeing a car. Then on the back of your tally sheet, we ask that for that car, so line number one, you would put the last 4 digits of the license plate. We don't want all the digits. This is of the license plate. This isn't a means of trying to track these cars down. This is solely for deduplication purposes. So when we go through and are processing the data, we'll make sure that the same car wasn't counted twice in case the car is moving around and going to multiple different census tract areas. The next sample would be if you see an encampment. So an encampment is defined as 2 or more tents or semi-permanent structures. So that, if you remember that picture I showed at the beginning of this slide, that is an example of an encampment. So these first lines 1 and 2, would be if you see 2 individuals standing outside, or you're able to see them by their tents. 2 males, one is in the 25 to 54 category, one is in the 55 plus. They're both in tents and they're together in the same area. So that would qualify as an encampment. So then you go to the column on the right that says encampment, fill in those bubbles and circle that they are in an encampment together. That's one example. If you look down to lines 5 through 7, that would be another sample of an encampment. That would be if you see 3 tents together, you can't see anybody inside. However, there's tents that you can tell are inhabited tents. You just aren't sure how many people are inside. That also qualifies an encampment. So you can do a line for each tent, go ahead and fill in the column for encampment with a circle, and then you're done. So we just finished up reviewing some samples of the tally sheets. Again, we'll go over that on the day of the count. Next, we just have a few more slides here and then we'll be all done. I'm going to take a second to review the guide and volunteer roles for the day of the count of your team. We expect that the homeless guide, uses their knowledge to identify individuals experiencing homelessness. The guides bring the team towards locations and map assignments that are likely to have individuals experiencing homelessness. When you're handed your map, originally at the deployment center, you guys can work together to kind of go over the map. And then when you're out and about driving and walking up through all the streets, we hope that your homeless guide would be able to direct you to certain locations that are likely to maybe have somebody sleeping in them. The guide also helps distinguish between safe and potentially dangerous situations. The volunteer role is to provide consultation and support in team decisions. The volunteer is generally in charge of the transportation, and the volunteer helps ensure full coverage of the map assignment. We ask that the teams reach a consensus together on who will be in charge of the tally sheet to ensure correct methodology. So you guys can work together while you're out in the field as far as who's going to be filling in the bubbles when they see somebody on the street or in the tent or in a vehicle. That can be the guide or the volunteer, whatever system works best for you. Next, I'm going to go through some safety logistics and just a couple more slides and then we'll be done. It's important that you are very safe and do not take any risks while out in the field. Like I mentioned before, this is a visual count only, so please do not approach individuals and ask them if they are homeless. Observe and tally only. Also, we want to make sure that you are not taking any photos while in the field. We want to respect these individuals' privacy, and we don't want them to think we're going to be doing anything with these photos. Also, we want to review and make sure you know that all information and locations that we collect on the day of the count will be kept confidential. This information is not discussed with outer groups after the count. Rather, it stays within our office and we process the data. It's important to stay with your teammate while you're out. Please don't separate. We ask that you stay together and keep track of each other and work together. We want to make sure that you're respectful of those individuals that you're counting. We want to remind you to call your deployment center captain if you have any problems or questions. Some more safety things to review. Don't enter abandoned buildings or other hard to access areas unless the team is familiar with those locations. So again, work together as the guide and volunteer to make a decision on what's the most safe route for you. Don't advertise your count location and keep information confidential post-count day. Again, this was where we want to remind you, if you see any encampments or you come across any tent areas, we don't want you to be sharing that information post-count. We want to respect those people's living accommodations. We'll review these safety protocols on the day of the count, and then, as always, while you're out in the field, call 911 if you have a true emergency. A couple things to review as far as preparation. You're going to want to try to wear comfortable shoes and clothes. You'll likely be out and about walking a lot. Dress warmly. You're out there early. As a volunteer, we ask that you bring a car if possible. Best to bring a charged cell phone that you can use while out in the field. You might want to bring a flashlight. You're going to be starting off pretty early in the morning, so some areas might be dark. A reminder that we'll be going out rain or shine. So bring an umbrella or raincoats if it's raining, and then get plenty of rest the night before. We'll be out there nice and early. You will be updated via email with any new information about the count, and then we have a 2017 Homeless Pit Count hotline if you have any questions, and that is through Applied Survey Research. The number is listed below, or you can also email Connie at appliedsurveyresearch.org if you have any questions from this training or any questions about where to go or what to do. But remember, we will review this training and the data collection protocols on the morning of the count when you arrive to your deployment center. Like I mentioned earlier, within the week or so before the count, we will email you with your deployment locations. If you are curious about that or need more information, feel free to reach out to this number or email when you're done with this. All right, that concludes our training for the 2017 point in time count. Thank you for your participation. We really appreciate your willingness and ability to volunteer on this important data collection process, and we look forward to seeing you. Thank you.